Have you ever been reading a book, following a chapter-by-chapter flow, only to turn the page and find that something is missing? Imagine you're in a library, holding one of the most influential books in human history. You turn to a familiar section, expecting the steady rhythm of its reading schedule, but suddenly, a chapter is skipped. No warning, no explanation, just gone. This isn't fiction. This happens every year in many Jewish synagogues. In the weekly cycle of readings, a particular passage from the prophet Isaiah, known among Christians as one of the most vivid messianic prophecies in the Bible, is quietly passed over. In its place, the reading jumps forward, leaving 12 verses in silence. Why skip it? Is it an accident, a quirk of tradition, or is there something about these words that makes them too difficult, too provocative to read aloud? Today, we're going to investigate. We'll explore the chapter before it, the chapter itself, and even the chapter after it. Isaiah 52 verse 13 through Isaiah 54. To see the bigger picture, we'll uncover history, listen to the words in full, and examine why these verses have sparked debate for more than 2,700 years. To understand why this passage matters, we need to understand the man who wrote it and the times he lived in. Isaiah was a prophet in the 8th century BCE, over 700 years before Jesus of Nazareth. He lived during the reigns of 4 kings of Judah, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. It was a period of political instability, with the Assyrian Empire rising in power and threatening the smaller kingdoms of the region. Spiritually, many in Judah had turned to idols, ignoring the covenant with the God of their ancestors. Isaiah's role was not to comfort the comfortable. He delivered warnings, called for repentance, and offered visions of a restored future. His writings, 66 chapters in total, move between stark judgments on injustice and breathtaking promises of redemption. Some Christian scholars have called Isaiah the 5th gospel because of how directly his words seem to foreshadow the life and mission of a coming figure, one called the servant of the Lord. This servant appears in several key sections, each time revealed with more clarity and more detail. In Jewish tradition, Scripture is read publicly in a set annual cycle. Each Sabbath, there's a reading from the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, and a corresponding section from prophets, known as the Haftorah. Isaiah appears often in the Haftorah readings. But in this structured cycle, something unusual happens. The reading proceeds normally through Isaiah 52 until verse 12. Then, instead of continuing into the final 3 verses of chapter 52 and all of chapter 53, it jumps straight to chapter 54. 12 verses are missing from the public reading. There's no explicit law forbidding it. No decree in the Talmud says, do not read Isaiah 53. And yet, for generations, these words have been absent in many congregations' yearly readings. Why? The explanations vary. Some say it's simply a matter of how the reading schedule was arranged centuries ago. Others acknowledge that the passage has become deeply associated with Christian interpretations that many Jewish teachers reject, and that reading it publicly could invite comparisons they do not wish to encourage. Whatever the reason, the result is the same. In many settings, these words are not heard, and when they are read, whether in a synagogue, a church, or in private study, they provoke strong reactions. Before we discuss interpretations or debates, let's do the one thing that cuts through opinion. Let's read the text itself. We'll begin at Isaiah 52, verse 13. Read all of chapter 53, the so-called forbidden chapter, and then continue into chapter 54 to see what follows. As you listen or read, imagine hearing this for the first time, without labels or preloaded expectations. Isaiah 52, verses 13 to 15. Behold, my servant shall deal prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. Just as many were astonished at you, so his visage was marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. So shall he sprinkle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths at him. For what had not been told them, they shall see, and what they had not heard, they shall consider. Isaiah 53, verses 1 to 12. Asterisk, who has believed our report? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him, There is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned, every one, to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who will declare his generation? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was stricken, and they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the labor of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge my righteous servant shall justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. Asterisk. Isaiah 54 verses 1 to 17. This chapter, often read without the preceding one in some traditions, shifts in tone. Where chapter 53 is somber and intimate, chapter 54 bursts with promise and restoration. Asterisk sing, O barren, you who have not borne, break forth into singing and cry aloud, you who have not labored with child. For more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married woman, says the Lord. Enlarge the place of your tent, and let them stretch out the curtains of your dwellings. Do not spare, lengthen your cords, and strengthen your stakes. For you shall expand to the right and to the left, and your descendants will inherit the nations, and make the desolate cities inhabited. Do not fear, for you will not be ashamed, neither be disgraced, for you will not be put to shame. For you will forget the shame of your youth, and will not remember the reproach of your widowhood anymore. For your Maker is your husband, the Lord of hosts is his name, and your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel. He is called the God of the whole earth. Asterisk. Continues through verse 17 with promises of protection, peace, and a covenant of everlasting mercy. This section is unlike the gloom that preceded it. The voice in Isaiah suddenly turns to exaltation. Behold, my servant shall deal prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. In the Hebrew, the words exalted and very high are terms often reserved for descriptions of God himself. This alone raises the stakes. Who is this servant lifted to such heights? Yet the next verse shocks the reader. His visage was marred more than any man. The contrast is stark. This figure is both glorified and disfigured. Some interpreters see here the idea of extreme suffering followed by great vindication. Others, reading through a national lens, see the people of Israel themselves, beaten down by centuries of exile, yet destined for honor among nations. The imagery of sprinkling many nations have been understood in multiple ways, as priestly atonement imagery in temple rituals, or as a poetic description of influence and cleansing across borders. Kings, we are told, will be silent in awe. Here is a question. Who has believed our report? This is not a solitary testimony. The voice is plural. We are speaking. The community, or perhaps the prophet alongside his people, is testifying to what they have seen and struggled to believe. The servant is described as growing up like a root out of dry ground, a fragile, unexpected shoot in a barren place. The Hebrew suggests not just physical plainness, but a lack of expected grandeur. In other words, if this figure is meant to be a leader, he doesn't look the part. The emotional weight deepens. He is despised and rejected by men. Whether one sees this as a rejection of an individual Messiah figure, the scorn of prophets in general, or the humiliation of Israel among nations. The point is the same. This servant is no stranger to sorrow. Here, the tone shifts from mere observation to interpretation. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. In Jewish interpretations that apply this to the nation of Israel, these verses reflect the suffering endured on behalf of others, the pain absorbed during exile, pogroms, and persecution. In Christian readings, this is often understood as substitution, one person taking on the weight of others' wrongs. The image of healing by his stripes, the marks of whipping or scourging, is particularly visceral. Healing here is not merely physical but relational, restorative. The Hebrew verb implies a mending or repair, like fixing what was broken. All we like sheep have gone astray paints a collective human picture, aimless, self-willed, vulnerable, with the servant carrying the consequence. One of the most striking elements here is the servant's silence. Led like a lamb to slaughter, he makes no defense. This is parallels in the ancient world. Dignified endurance was considered honorable in certain contexts, but the lamb imagery also evokes sacrifice. The servant is cut off in the land of the living, a poetic way to say he dies, and yet his burial is unusual. With the wicked, but with the rich it is death. This juxtaposition has puzzled commentators for centuries. It suggests a fate linked to criminals, yet a resting place among the wealthy, a detail too specific to ignore. That he had done no violence underscores the injustice of it all. Here, the tone shifts again. The servant's suffering is not meaningless. It is described as an offering for sin, a term with precise meaning in the sacrificial system. But then comes a paradox. He shall prolong his days. Death is not the end. Whether interpreted as the enduring legacy of a people or the resurrection of an individual, the meaning is the same. This suffering leads to an outcome of life, influence, and victory. The servant is rewarded, given a portion with the great, not for conquest, but for pouring out his life and standing in the place of others. If chapter 53 is a dirge, chapter 54 is a song. It opens with an impossible command to the barren. Sing, break forth into singing. The sudden shift feels almost jarring, as if mourning has turned instantly to joy. The imagery of a barren woman gaining more children than the married one speaks of unexpected abundance. In ancient cultures, childlessness was a mark of shame. Here, it is overturned. The tent imagery, lengthening cords, strengthening stakes, is about expansion, growth, and preparing for a larger family. In both Jewish and Christian traditions, this has been read as a promise of restoration after exile or redemption after suffering. God speaks as a husband to a wife who has faced abandonment and shame, now promising eternal faithfulness. The imagery is deeply relational. Your Maker is your husband. The Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer. The chapter ends with one of the most famous promises in Isaiah. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. This is a heritage of the servants of the Lord. This is not merely personal comfort. It's a communal promise. Whatever the servant's work accomplished in chapter 53, its results are felt here, in protection, restoration, and peace. In the Jewish liturgical tradition, the Haftorah cycle was designed to ensure prophetic writings would be read alongside the Torah throughout the year. But somewhere in the history of this tradition, the reading for this portion of Isaiah developed a peculiar gap. The schedule moves through Isaiah 52, but stops at verse 12. Then, without explanation, it skips to chapter 54. 12 verses, 52:13, 53:12, are missing from the public reading. There is no formal ban. The Talmud does not list Isaiah 53 as forbidden. No ancient council left a written command to avoid it. And yet, in practice, in many synagogues around the world, this section is simply never read aloud during the yearly cycle. Historians and religious scholars offer several theories for why this omission persists. Accidental legacy of the cycle's arrangement. The formalization of the Haftorah readings happened over centuries, especially during the Middle Ages. It's possible the omission was a result of thematic pairing decisions and was never corrected. The chapter was not intentionally removed, but simply bypassed. Avoidance of controversy. By the early centuries of the Common Era, Christian teachers were using Isaiah 53 extensively to point to Jesus as a Messiah. In Jewish communities that did not accept Jesus in this role, reading the passage publicly could invite immediate, pointed questions. Skipping it entirely avoided those confrontations in the synagogue setting. Shift in interpretation. Ancient rabbinic commentaries sometimes interpreted the servant as the Messiah. But over time, particularly after repeated debates with Christian interpreters, the dominant Jewish reading became that the servant represented the nation of Israel. The synagogue setting is not generally used for deep theological disputation, so controversial sections that could derail the service were sometimes omitted from the public cycle. There are three primary ways Isaiah 53 is understood today. The messianic figure. In Christian tradition, this servant is seen as a prophetic description of Jesus of Nazareth's suffering, death, and resurrection. Details such as his rejection, silent suffering, unjust death, and association with both the wicked and the rich are viewed as striking parallels to the gospel narratives. The nation of Israel. In the mainstream Jewish reading, especially post-medieval, the servant represents the Jewish people as a whole, enduring suffering and exile, bearing the score of the nations, and ultimately being vindicated by God, the ideal righteous sufferer. Some modern scholars, both religious and secular, interpret the servant as a symbolic or composite figure, the embodiment of all righteous people who suffer unjustly but remain faithful, and whose endurance brings redemption to others. Each interpretation is shaped by its theological framework, and each, in its own way, finds resonance in the text's poetic depth. Isaiah 53 is more than literature. It's a mirror for the soul. The servant story is deeply personal, suffering not for personal gain, but for the sake of others. For some, that evokes gratitude toward a redeemer. For others, it resonates as the story of their people's resilience. For still others, it stands as a universal truth about injustice and selflessness. And yet, because of how powerfully it aligns with the Christian account of Jesus, it remains a point of tension in interfaith dialogue. Jewish readers may feel it has been taken from its original context. Christian readers may feel it is being withheld. This dynamic means that the chapter is often approached with caution, whether in worship or in academic settings. It's not that the words themselves are rejected. They are part of the same Isaiah scroll, but the conversation they provoke can be as challenging as the content itself. What is fascinating is that the omission of Isaiah 53 in the public reading doesn't erase the next chapter. Chapter 54, the Song of Restoration, is still read aloud. This means congregations hear the triumphant aftermath, the barren woman singing, the tent expanding, the promise of no weapon prospering, without the somber servant song that precedes it. To read 54 without 53 is to start at sunrise without remembering the night before. It is hope without the cost, restoration without the suffering that made it possible. In some ways, this may be why reading these chapters together, in private study or interfaith discussion, often has such a strong impact. The emotional leap from the sorrow of 53 to the joy of 54 becomes even more vivid when experienced in sequence. In the end, the so-called forbidden chapter is not truly forbidden. It is written in the same scroll, preserved in the same canon, accessible to anyone with the will to read it. The silence around it in certain traditions is as much about preserving communal harmony as it is about theology. The choice to read it, to wrestle with its meaning, remains with each individual. And perhaps that is where its enduring power lies, in the fact that it demands a personal encounter. When we step back from Isaiah 53 and 54, the contrast is almost cinematic. One moment, we are in the shadows. The servant is despised, wounded, cut off in the land of the living. The tone is hushed, heavy, almost unbearably intimate. The next moment, the curtain lifts on a scene of singing and restoration. Tent expanding, shame erased, peace declared permanent. What ties these chapters together is not immediately obvious unless you read them in sequence. The sorrow of 53 is the soil for which the joy of 54 grows. Without the former, the latter risks becoming sentiment without substance. Across cultures and centuries, the pattern is familiar. Deep suffering often precedes profound transformation. Nations rebuild after war. Individuals find clarity after personal trials. Faith communities are reshaped after hardship. Isaiah's servant embodies this truth. Whether seen as an individual Messiah, the people of Israel, or symbolic righteous figure. In the text, the suffering is not wasted. It becomes a catalyst for something far greater than survival. It births a peace described as unshakable. Rather than offering a single interpretation as the correct one, we can allow the servant song and the restoration song to speak for themselves. Ask yourself, who do you see in the servant? What does it mean to you that someone or some community would bear griefs and sorrows on behalf of others? How does a sudden shift to joy and restoration in Isaiah 54 change the way you read the suffering of chapter 53? These are not questions with quick answers. They are meant to linger, to be revisited as you encounter new experiences, new challenges, and new understandings. One of the most striking aspects of this investigation is that the so-called forbidden chapter has never truly been forbidden. It sits there in the same scroll, waiting for anyone willing to turn the page and read. In our age, access to these words is easier than ever. You can hear them in the original Hebrew, read them in dozens of translations, compare them side by side with commentaries from vastly different perspectives. But access is not the same as engagement. A passage can be publicly available yet functionally hidden if it is never brought to mind, never read aloud, never allowed to challenge us. Isaiah's servant song and the following restoration song are not just relics of ancient prophecy. They are an invitation to consider the relationship between cost and comfort, sacrifice and peace, struggle and joy. Whoever the servant is, Messiah, Israel, righteous sufferer, the message is that suffering endured with purpose can bring about healing far beyond oneself. And Isaiah 54's voice of restoration suggests that such healing is not merely internal. It spreads. It fills tents. It reclaims abandoned cities. It speaks of a peace that is not fragile but permanent. So here's where our investigation leaves us. Isaiah 53 challenges us to look unflinchingly at unjust suffering. Isaiah 54 calls us to imagine a restoration so complete that past shame is forgotten. Together, they form a whole, one that some traditions read publicly, others avoid, but all preserve. The question is not whether the passage is accessible. The question is, will you take the time to read it for yourself? Will you allow it to speak in its own voice before you decide what it means? The prophet's invitation still echoes. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Whether you approach these words as history, poetry, prophecy, or all three, their enduring presence in the scroll is proof of their resilience. Isaiah 53 to 54 is not just an ancient text. It's a mirror. It reflects suffering and joy, rejection and belonging, silence and song. And like any good investigation, the most important discoveries are not the ones the narrator makes, but the ones the listener takes away for themselves.